When it comes to creating a story, an author will tend to have a good amount of their ideas planned out ahead of time, even with series that are written weekly, as there tends to always be a goal for the characters to reach, or at least a moment in the mind of the author that they write for. Though, there will always come a time in any story's creative process where you need to do or create something new, and these ideas can become iconic in their own right, even if they weren't planned to be, and one of the best examples of this being is in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5 Golden Wind, and the powerfully persistent post-mortem Play-Doh stand, Notorious B.I.G. Notorious B.I.G. is the stand of Carne, a member of Passion's own Unità Speciale, and the titular main threat of the Notorious B.I.G. arc of Part 5, as it pursues Bruno's gang with seemingly endless persistence, and over the course of the fight, grows and consumes more and more, while incapacitating everyone in its way. And the only person who can do anything to stop it is the daughter of the same person Carne swore to protect, which is kind of funny given that Trish is the only reason that this whole arc exists to begin with. Though, before we get too into that, let's understand the meaning behind his name and design. Starting first with the user, Carne, which I believe was only given his name in the volume release, though, like most characters in Part 5, it follows the naming theme of the part, which is Italian words, usually food, and in the case of Carne, it means meat, or more specifically, the dead meat of animals meant for consumption. And this name was likely chosen as a joke about his role in the story, as Carne's whole purpose is to die. He is quite literally walking dead meat. The reason for this being is that his stand ability only activates upon the death of the user, though with such a great cost comes an even greater reward, as the stand he unleashes is Notorious B.I.G. Now, Notorious B.I.G. is an automatic stand which originally took on a humanoid form when alive, but melted into a shapeless blob upon death, which can then mutate into a much larger form after consuming enough energy. Though, all the while, it maintains this mask-like face guard throughout all of its transformations. Ability-wise, Notorious B.I.G. has some of the most interesting tricks up its sleeve, though before we can discuss them, we should go over what I mentioned before, that being its post-mortem activation cost, which essentially means Notorious B.I.G.'s actual skills are locked behind the user still being alive. Though, it is still a stand, so even though it wouldn't be all that helpful, Carne can still summon Notorious B.I.G. in its humanoid form, but he can't really do anything fancy with it. Though once the user dies, things get interesting. Starting first with its main ability, energy consumption. How this works is that anyone or anything that touches the body of the user or the stand will become infected with a fragment of B.I.G. This small fragment will slowly begin consuming the person's life force or energy, damaging not only their body, but their stands as well, which essentially makes B.I.G. completely immune to both physical and stand-based attacks, as hitting it will only cause the part of the body that touched B.I.G. to be consumed as well. Also, B.I.G. can suck the energy out of just about anything, including motors and plane engines. Along with this, the more energy that B.I.G. consumes, the larger it physically becomes. Along with this, while attached to someone, B.I.G. can partly puppet their bodies, such as when it made Giorno grab a couple of Carne's fingers when he was checking the body before entering the plane, and when it began to write a farewell message partly based on Giorno's own thoughts. And once it is attached, the only way to remove this parasite is by severing the infected body part, or that would be the case if not for B.I.G.'s other abilities as well. This being speed detection and matching. These abilities allow B.I.G. to identify within its range the fastest moving target. Then, once it's made its decision, it will accelerate its body to match the object's speed, and then latch itself onto it. This allows the stand to catch up with a plane mid-flight, along with help it determine the order in which it attacks. And though this ability is terrifying, as it means that escape is nearly impossible from B.I.G., the tracking is also very exploitable. As long as you move slower than the fastest moving object in the room, you're safe. Along with this, B.I.G. also possesses minor shape-shifting abilities as well, though this is only used sparingly throughout the part for either mimicking body parts or making a possible reference to the famous Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. And speaking of references, design-wise, B.I.G. seems clearly inspired by the 1988 remake of The Blob, as both are pinkish-colored shapeless masses of goo which consume and destroy on instinct, are completely indestructible and can only be defeated by being displaced. They also both utilize tentacles made from their body, and even possess some form of intelligence, no matter how basic. Along with this, certain moments in the fight mirror that of moments in the 1988 version of the Blob. And it wouldn't be the first time that Araki has referenced this movie in JoJo, with the previous time being Yellow Temperance, and B.I.G. is essentially that stand on crack. And speaking of Part 3 references, B.I.G. also seems to reference another stand, as their existence is logicked out to be the hatred of the user's heart made manifest from beyond the grave, which is very similar to the ability of Ebony Devil. Though this is also just a common trend in Japanese ghosts, where they become vengeful spirits due to dying with hatred in their hearts. Now, name-wise, Notorious B.I.G. is in reference to the American rapper and songwriter, the Notorious B.I.G., also known as Biggie Smalls. Biggie was an amazingly talented musician who was involved with some less than glamorous things growing up, and his career as an artist was full of hardships and controversies as well. But in the face of all of that, he was still successful. Then on March 9th of 1997, while stopped at a red light, Biggie was shot and killed by an unnamed assailant. And 16 days after the shooting, his final album of his career would release called Life After Death, which became very successful. So much so that this album, alongside the death of its creator, became a clear sign of the stylistic change to come to the gangster rap genre of music. As while it didn't steer away from the uglier side of the gangster life, the sound behind the songs became much more upbeat or commercially successful for the mainstream. So in a way, Biggie became sort of the face for this change in the industry, and it was this kind of music that Araki was specifically listening to during the writing process of Part 5, as he wanted to capture that gangster image with his cast of mafiosos. And it would seem to me that Araki is taking clear inspiration from the story of Biggie Smalls when creating Carne and Notorious B.I.G. Not only by having the two debut short of a year after Biggie's death, but also having Carne be this rather large and imposing man who gets shot dead, which then goes on to trigger the activation of his stand, which essentially persists as a life after death. Along with this, Carne's involvement with the mob can be seen as a reference to Biggie's own involvement with the gangster underworld of the Americas during his life, especially around the late 90s. And much like how Biggie changed the music industry, Notorious B.I.G. changed the series' own perspective on how stands can function, making this fight instantly memorable, and while only being pseudo-canon, is actually part of the plot of Purple Haze Feedback, with Giorno being worried about Purple Haze going crazy in a similar way to Notorious B.I.G., so he wanted to win Fugo's trust over to ensure that something like that wouldn't happen. Now, clearly some aspects of Notorious B.I.G. wouldn't have been possible during the planning stage of Part 5, as a lot of its references are based on pretty recent events as of the writing of those arcs, and this is because B.I.G. was never originally planned for Part 5, as Araki has admitted in the past that the stand, along with the arc itself, was merely created to give Trish someone to fight so that she could awaken to her stand, which is why B.I.G. is also so quick to cripple the whole of Bruno's gang, and likely why the ability is so similar to previous stands like Yellow Temperance or Ebony Devil. He even jokes that he enjoyed designing Carne a little bit more than B.I.G. itself. Though, even so, B.I.G. is an iconic stand in the series in its own right, being one of the very few cases in JoJo where things look truly hopeless for our cast, along with its userless status being sort of a partial foreshadowing to the potential limitless nature of stands and things like Chariot Requiem, where without a user, abilities just sort of start destroying the world. And how it's ultimately defeated is great, with it disappearing into the ocean, which in a way is a reference to the Blob and how it was originally defeated. But instead of just being dumped and forgotten, B.I.G. becomes sort of a natural phenomenon, nicknamed the Turanian stomach. Similar in idea to things like the Bermuda Triangle or the Kraken, which raises some interesting questions. In the world of JoJo, are these phenomenons actually just stands or stand-like entities? That'd be something interesting to dig into, so maybe something for the future. Though there is always one part of B.I.G. and Carne that people tend to wonder about because it's not really even explained, and that's how does Carne know how his ability works, given that it only activates after he died? Which is a pretty funny thing to think about at first, seems sort of paradoxical in a sense, but the answer is likely something as simple as his stand just informed him when he got it, as it does have a humanoid form and he could summon it beforehand. Though, if you don't accept that, there's also the possibility of Passion just kind of tracking down a psychic who could sort of read what his ability is, as in the world of JoJo, fortune tellers can just kind of do that. But with that all said and done, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you want to see more videos like it in the future, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/medingoutthebadguy. Every little bit helps keep this channel flowing as smoothly as it does. And if you want to defeat Notorious B.I.G, well, I hear that if you throw a copy of Shimonetta out, then it will consume it and become enlightened. Therefore, it will no longer need to attack you.